Welcome to my channel 1122, where we'll be discussing astrology and how it's a useful tool or a useful guide throughout life. Yeah, let's get to it. This is the first episode or the first video I've ever done. So to start off correctly, I'd have to discuss the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere and how those two different hemispheres, which are opposite from each other, determine the view or the perspective or the how opposite the views or the perspectives of the stars in which we have from each other. So basically what I'm trying to say is I'm going to be discussing how a person who lives in the northern hemisphere will see the stars in an opposite way or in an opposite view from a person who lives in the southern hemisphere. Right? That's the point of the video. I'm trying to explain how. Okay, let me just get to it. Let me just talk. Okay, so astrology is the study of the stars and constellations and planets and the universe and how those aspects of those things I've just mentioned play a role in our life or show us things about ourselves. So this study of the planets and constellations called astrology was first discovered, was founded by Africans, yeah, in the southern hemisphere. This is important. In the southern hemisphere. And then further in time, people from the northern hemisphere came and took the knowledge and went back home with it in the northern hemisphere, where they further reconstructed it to fit their views or to fit their perspective of the world and how the universe works. So this can be kind of disturbing when information is being distributed throughout the world in a one-sided view. That's kind of it gets a bit tricky for those who live in the opposite pole of the world. Because the world has an imaginary line called the equator, and those who live above the line live in the northern hemisphere, and those who live below the line live in the southern hemisphere. Now, that means they have opposite view. They have an opposite view of the stars. Okay, I'll explain this. Now, when it's let's take the season of, let's say it's the 11th of April, right? Now, if I'm living in the northern hemisphere and it's around April or late April or when April just begun, I will see the constellation Aries because I'm living in the northern hemisphere. But if I'm living in the southern hemisphere and it's around April at that time, I will see Libra because I see the opposite constellation from the northern hemisphere, right? These two hemispheres see the sun from the opposite direction from each other, right? The sun in astrology represents your overall energy. You have what is called a sun sign, which is the sign that you identify with. It is the ego that you identify with within astrology, right? So since people from the northern hemisphere see it opposite from those who live in the southern hemisphere and has distributed this information as the correct information, that's why you'll find that people in the southern hemisphere, when they Google what's my star sign, if I'm born at a certain time, let's say they're born in 22nd of June, then they'll find that astrology tells them that they are Cancer, because astrology has been distributed in a way that only shows the understanding of those who live in the northern hemisphere, or the perspective of those who live in the northern hemisphere, right? When in actuality, if you live in the southern hemisphere and find that you were born on the 22nd of June, you're not actually a Cancer, you are actually the opposite of a Cancer, because from the opposite, from the southern hemisphere, you do not see Cancer in the constellations at that time. You actually see the opposite of Cancer, which is Capricorn. So what I'm trying to tell you is, if you live in the southern hemisphere, because this is mostly with the southern hemisphere people who live in the southern hemisphere. I'm from South Africa, and I spent a long time thinking that I was an Aries, when in actuality I'm actually a Libra. That can be a very it can be a very disturbing when your world shifts, when someone breaks your ego or breaks the illusion of the world that you have. Some people are never ready for that. But it's best that people learn, Bana, they are not the signs they think they are. They're actually the opposite of those signs that they've been believing that they are. Because Ngogo, it allows you to walk within the right direction, because your whole life you spent walking the opposite direction. You're supposed to be going this way, but you've been walking that way all your life. So the purpose of this video is to align you back to where you're actually supposed to be walking, towards the correct sun sign. So if you are a Sagittarius, or if you have been thinking you are a Sagittarius, those living in the southern hemisphere, you are not a Sagittarius, you're actually a Gemini. If you have been believing that you are a Virgo, you are not a Virgo, you are actually a Pisces. Again, I'll explain. This is because from the southern hemisphere, from where you're standing, your sun has been in the constellation of Libra instead of Aries. It has only been in Aries from those who are standing in the northern hemisphere. Do you understand? So this is important. This is important. It is important to know this, because it aligns your spirit towards the right direction. You are trying to align your spirit, um, or your overall energy and your ego and whatnot towards the right um, archetype. And yeah, I think that's the first video. I'm not sure if I missed anything, but that's it. That's all I have to say for now. So Scorpios in the southern hemisphere, you are not the Scorpio you think you are. You're actually the Taurus. The reason it's so easy to accept the idea that you are a Taurus if you're born on the 6th of May is because Taurus and Scorpio are the opposite signs, meaning they have similar traits but reflected in the opposite way. Both Taurus and Scorpios will have a possessive vibe about them. That's why it's so easy to accept the idea that you're this star sign instead of this. And usually people who identify with star signs, they usually aren't familiar with the opposite sign. I remember I was not familiar with the Libra. I thought it was an Aries my whole life, and I was not familiar with the Libra sign. I never took the time to study it. Whereas in actuality, I should have been studying Libra instead of. So that's my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.